Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell, and you know what time it is. It is time for Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. Now, I got a powerhouse guest for you. It is none other than Mike Robbins. We're going to dive into some pretty, I don't know, I think kind of heavy topics about what it takes to really build resilience and really stay focused in an uncertain marketplace. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, Mike, tell us. I always like to start off by having you tell our audience a little bit about Mike Robbins. I mean, I was all over your website. I ordered two of your books. You've got
Thank you.
a pretty broad range of, I mean, I know you're all in the leadership space, but pretty broad range of topics. So, how'd you get started? Tell us a little bit about that baseball career and then kind of guide us to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been, speaking and writing and coaching now. This is year 25, but it all kind of started, Meredith, for me. I played baseball all growing up here in California, where I still live, and actually got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees. Didn't end up signing with the Yankees at that time because I got an opportunity to play baseball in college down at Stanford, about an hour from where I grew up in Oakland, and then got drafted out of Stanford by the Kansas City Royals and did sign a pro contract at that time. You have to go into the minor leagues in pro baseball. And unfortunately for me, I went out to pitch one night, my third season, still in the minors. And I threw one pitch. I tore ligaments in my elbow, blew my arm out. And that was basically, I mean, 2 years, three surgeries later, I was when I was finally done. But that was basically the end of my career. And I had started baseball at 7, got hurt at 23, and then was forced to retire at 25. So
So there you are, retired at 25. What then?
right. Well, I didn't really know what the heck. I mean, I was lost, as you could imagine, and in therapy and trying to figure out what the heck to do next. It was the late 90s. I got a job working for an internet company. I live here in the San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Bay Area. So there was all that was happening, sort of internet.com boom time. And I was selling ads I didn't know. I mean, I was trying to put one foot in front of the other. But what's interesting, I mean, this is ultimately what had me start my business because I spent a couple years working for two different internet startups in the late 90s into 2000. And then the dot-com bubble burst and I ultimately lost my job. But what I had really noticed that fascinated me was like when I was playing baseball, it wasn't always the most talented people that were the most successful, and it wasn't always the most successful people that seemed the happiest. So that was interesting to me on an individual level. And then on a team level, it wasn't always the teams that had the most talented players that necessarily made the best teams. There were these other intangible things that I sort of erroneously in those days thought were related to sports. And then I got my first job, and then I'm out in the real world, and I realized, oh, this whole sort of mindset thing for individuals and chemistry or culture thing for teams, that's a human thing. That's not a sports thing. So when I lost my job, I had a mentor ask me, like, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I was like, well, I would start writing about these things and speaking about these things and trying to coach people. And he was like, okay, you should do that now. And I was like, is that a business? I'm 26 years old. I don't really even know. Can you make money? Like anyway, but I started to that's how I found the National Speakers Association where you and I know each other from. And it's like I started down that path of like, I think I have something to share and say, even though I'm quite young. And I think there's some connection to this whole notion of like our mindset matters, how we relate to each other matters. And that's really what I've been studying for the last 25 years is just individual and team performance, but looking at a lot of the sort of softer, intangible sides of those things and putting them into practice.
So I'm curious, when you were quote unquote in sports, because I'm trying to think like now that I listen to you talk about this, and I really want to dive into this subject because I don't do a lot of work in it, but it really is fascinating. It was so this week I was with a CEO who was had been in special ops in the military, and
Mhm.
he was telling me a story about being in the foxhole with other soldiers who didn't weren't in the direct line of fire and they were scared to death.
Right.
And he was talking about it when he was in that foxhole to try to get them through the night, he kept trying to connect with them. "Do you have a brother? Do you have a sister? Tell me about your hometown." And he was saying it was because I needed them to move to action. but
Yep.
the only way I could do that was to connect with them first. So I was
Yep.
trying to think to myself, like, when did this language come into the corporate world? Because I'm kind of old and I don't really remember anybody talking about mindset when I was growing up and things. So did it have a language in sports that you took it to business, or did you sort of like intuitively know it and then all of a sudden the world caught up with you and put a language around it?
I mean, it's more the latter than the former, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like I thought I was crazy growing like I was really good at sports, but I would get really nervous and be really insecure. And I'd look at my teammates and they didn't look as nervous as I felt. So I thought something was wrong with me. And I remember I actually went and saw a sports psychologist when I was in college. And I told her, I was like, sometimes I'm standing on the mound and I have all these terrible thoughts and I see all this terrible stuff happening. And I think like, am I losing my mind? What's going on? And she's like, no, it's just the way the brain works. And she like explained it to me, kind of what was happening in my brain and my nervous system. And she gave me a couple techniques, like breathing techniques. And then she talked to me about visualizations that I could use. And then my girlfriend at the time was a swimmer at Stanford. And then she was working with her swim coach, who was very progressive. He was bringing in people to work with them on mindfulness and meditation back in the mid 90s, which again wasn't widespread. So she gave me these cassette tapes and we used to listen to them together and we started meditating. And so again, but I was doing all of this like in secret because
Yeah.
I thought I was crazy because I was insecure. And then I thought I was crazy. Like if my teammates knew that I was doing this stuff, they would think that I was weird. But then once I got into the business world, and then even when I started my business though, 25 years ago, Meredith, I mean, people weren't really talking about,
No, not at all.
I was kind of talking about them in code. And then over time, it's like things have evolved, things have evolved, things have evolved. And now we talk much more about mindset and psychological safety and all these things that we all now understand are necessary for performance. But I just think we've evolved and language has evolved. And now I think we understand the importance of them more. And they're so much more mainstream, which I'm grateful for. But, it is interesting to see how things change.
Yeah. So a question I've got for you. So I definitely think that they have gone mainstream. I mean, you hear vision all over the place, you hear culture all over the place. But I tell you, when I was doing research on you and studying you, you seem to go at such a deeper level. And the thing that struck me, and even more so now that we're talking, it seems still to be at a corporate level in so many organizations, still at a surface level. Like, if we define our values, we have a culture. If we all do a DISC personality test, somehow we're connected, right? Like, so what does it really mean? Like, what would you say are sort of the qualities or the components of high performance? And then what do you gotta go through to really get those into place?
I mean, look, the two primary pillars of my work that I've studied extensively, and I tend to talk about almost everywhere in every context, are authenticity and appreciation. And even your story about the foxhole, like I haven't been in a situation, I haven't spent time in the military, although I've worked with some folks in the military, but the like connecting human to human at a deeper level. I mean, being able to not only know like where you're from and do you have siblings and all, but like what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
And what are you excited about? Like those types of things. Like to me, it's like I sort of call it, I use the overused metaphor of the iceberg, but it's like lowering the waterline on the iceberg because that's ultimately, if we're a leader who wants to connect with our team, if you're a salesperson who wants to connect with a prospect or a customer, if you're just a human being wanting to connect with the people around you, even and especially in this world where we're running 100 miles an hour and we're connecting on Zoom and Teams and everything, it's like, how can we connect human to human? And it's not just something that feels good. It's ultimately something that as you infuse that within teams and within companies, like that's really the foundation ultimately of culture is people connecting with each other in a real way.
Why does connecting with people in a real way drive performance? Like, what goes off in us that it drives performance?
I mean, look, I think we're social creatures. And I think when we're committed to each other, I mean, this is again what I saw in sports. And it's weird when you think about sports, it's like, well, why would it matter if you care about your teammates? Why would it matter if you have a connection with each other? Because you win and lose together and people get
Yeah.
hurt and it's challenging and it's stressful and it's scary when you're out there on the field. And it's like knowing when I'm playing with my teammates, we weren't all best friends necessarily, but we had this sort of connection with each other. I know about them. I know about their families. I know about some of their hopes and dreams and fears and doubts. Like that actually weirdly made me want to play harder with them. And we all have that experience, whether you play sports or not. It's even like, I often use this silly little example, but it's like, when you're stuck in traffic, if someone's trying to merge in when you're stuck in traffic, what do you do if you don't want to let them in? You don't look at them, right?
Right.
The moment you look, if I see you in the
Yeah,
other car, unless you're like screaming at me and flipping me off, I'm gonna let you in because I
exactly.
see that we make eye contact. I have that moment of empathy of like, I know what it's like to be stuck out there. That sucks. So then I let you in. And if you give me a wave and I wave back, then we have that moment of sort of mutual connection and we'll never see each other again. But if we don't look, then we can just pretend like I don't have to deal with that person and think about them being upset or me being not very nice or kind and letting them in. I'm
Right.
just, you know what I mean? And so in a company, again, it's like if we make connections with each other on a human level, it does impact some of our decision making. And it does, while at times can be a little messier and take a little more time, it actually binds us together and allows us to leverage our strengths better if we actually invest in one another.
When you feel connected, there's something that goes off in you to really drive at I love that example of the traffic. I was just thinking about the fact that, I think we've really missed in corporate America how much we can learn from athletics.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea of working really, really hard, then taking the time to rest and to prioritize your own health because you've gotta be, this big contributor to the team. I think there's a lot we can learn there, but this past summer, I was playing tennis over at where I play tennis, and our coach over there used to coach the college team. And one of his students who had graduated probably 3 or 4 years ago decided to walk on with his partner as a doubles at Wimbledon. Whatever they did, they went in to qualify. They got a wild card. Well,
Wow.
they ended up winning the doubles championship at Wimbledon. But here's like, after speaking to you, here's why I think they did was that every day I would go over to take a lesson or play, and we would get an update as to where he was doing, with Wimbledon, and he just kept getting through one. Well, when he got to the semifinals, every single member of his tennis team, no matter where they were on the world, including Tom, our coach, flew over to support him. Now,
Wow.
they hadn't been on the same tennis team in, probably 4 years since they all graduated. But I think there is something about that. They were so connected at that level that
Yeah.
you just wonder if it pushed the adrenaline over the edge.
I mean, I believe it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm still on a group chat with all my teammates from college, and we're all in our 50s now, and we played together when we were in our teens and early 20s. Like there is something that now we had a special group, but and if you listen to athletes, by the way, who retire, you ask them what they miss. They sometimes will say they miss the competition, the excitement, but usually it's they miss their teammates.
Yeah.
And so, one question that I often ask when I speak, it's or two back-to-back questions. I sort of say, how many of you have ever been a part of a team or leading a team where the talent on the team was good, but the team didn't perform very well together? And of course, everybody raises their
Yeah.
hand. And then I say, on the flip side, though, how many of you have ever been a part of a team or leading a team where it's not like every single person on the team in and of themselves was a rock star, but something about the team just kind of worked and the team really performed? And again, almost everybody raises their hand. And I usually say, look, that's usually not as common, but it's often much more enjoyable. And the thing about it is, it really is, it's like more of an art than a science of like, how do you create that kind of culture? And that to me, especially in today's world with all the uncertainty and all the stress and everything going on, like that's really what differentiates great leaders from just good leaders, great teams from just good teams. And it's not a one size fits all thing because we do have to tweak it. We have to adjust it to the team that we actually have, the company we're actually working in, the industry that we're in. And it's both, I think, more challenging than ever these days and more important than ever.
Well, let's go there. We are, filming this February 28th, 2025, and the uncertainty is, I think if I would have had to sit down and draw a map or a vision of what I thought the uncertainty, I don't think that I could have dreamt this up.
Right.
If we'd been filming this in November of 2024, I would have told you that the uncertainty was unmanageable. And now here we are at a whole nother level
I
of
know.
uncertainty. I don't have a single client that that feels confident they have any idea what's about to happen to them in the next 3 to 4 months. Even the ones that are positive are still like, I got no idea. It could go this way, it could go that way. Where does so there I am, I'm managing a team. Maybe I'm going to get hit by these, by these tariffs. Maybe the geopolitical situations kind of upsetting, you know, my strategy or my thoughts for the future. I've got quite a few clients that are looking at drastic funding cuts, those types of things. How do you use, connection? How do you use mindset to not only help yourself navigate uncertainty, but to help your team and to help others navigate uncertainty?
I mean, one thing is a little weird to think of in this context, but I'm glad you're bringing it up because if you think about here we are, we're almost exactly at 5 years from when COVID sort of took over,
Oh, that's
right? I know
right.
that.
Yeah.
And what's weird is like, we're not in the pandemic, thankfully, anymore. Although some of what we're dealing with now, I still feel like is residual from
Yeah.
all the uncertainty of the last 5 years. But if you think of it, we were having this conversation 5 years ago, the thought of what we were about to go through in that next year or two, and especially even over these last 5 years, would be hard to fathom. And so, what I've been saying to some of the leaders that I work with recently is think back to the early days of COVID. Not that we want to go back there. And that was a very scary, very just bizarre time for all of us because none of us had ever dealt with anything
No.
like that. Now, today, some of the stresses and challenges are very different, obviously, but similarly, it's kind of like we don't really know what next week and next month hold. So I've been reminding people, remember in those early days of COVID, all we could really do was show up, mostly on Zoom or whatever platform we were using, and try to be real about what was going
Right.
on, what we knew, what we didn't know, and try to connect with our teams and just say, okay, here's what I know today. Like I remember even saying to my own team, I'm out of the prediction business like a month or two into COVID because I kept predicting what I thought was going to happen. And I realized A, I had no idea. B, I was mostly wrong. And C, I was doing that because I was personally scared and trying to make some sense out of what didn't seem to make any sense. So I think if we remember that, like, we've been in times not even that long ago of significant uncertainty, and we did make it through, even though it was bumpy. So I really feel like showing up right now, being as present as we possibly can, listening and learning to people who are even smarter than we are about what they think might be happening. But the truth is, nobody really knows. I mean, even some of the smartest people I know,
Oh,
nobody really has
yeah.
any idea. So I think what we can do is we know what's happening right now. We know the plan that we have for the year. We know the objectives that we have. We know the vision and the mission. It's like getting back to some of the basics of what do we know for sure? And then can we just embrace this time of uncertainty with as much of a growth mindset as possible? And I like to think of growth mindset in a really simple way that it's basically asking ourselves, whatever happens, why is this happening for me? Or why is this happening
Gotcha.
for us? Right? It's a simple mindset shift, but it's like instead of like, wait, what is this? Or this is terrible, or I don't like this, or it's like Byron Katie says, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. So if we can stop arguing with reality and just go, this is what it's like right now. Again, if we fast forward 6 months, there may be more uncertainty, there may be less, but it's not going to be the same as right now.
Yeah.
We know we've gotten through things in the past. So again, I don't mean to minimize it, but I think there's some aspect of being able to embrace the uncertainty. Not that we like it necessarily, but just understanding like that seems to be the nature of life and business right now.
Yeah, it's interesting too, like, I think a couple things, like, one of my, I get up every morning, do my meditation, and then I say a few things to myself, and one of the things I say to myself is that life happens for me, not to me,
Yeah.
and it is a simple reframe, and I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation where something that my mind frames as bad, I lose a job, something like that, and I'll just say to myself, it's interesting. I wonder why this is happening for me. And it resets you. The other thing I think that is fascinating, I know when I did the research on uncertainty, we frame it as a negative. And I really wonder if you look back on your life, like, you head to college, you've no idea what the future is going to hold for you.
Yep.
You hurt your arm and baseball didn't work out. That the uncertainty, I bet more often than not, it leads to something positive in our lives.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, most of us, I mean, again, I often will ask the question, like, how many of you have had something terrible happen or you thought was terrible? And then with enough time and enough perspective, you look back and you realize what a blessing.
Yeah.
And it's hard in the moment. And again, this isn't about minimizing or sugarcoating
Right.
when painful things happen, because that's, we don't want to go into that sort of toxic positivity thing. But I do think remembering that times of uncertainty, times of disruption, times of significant change, even pain often are what birth what's next. I had lunch with a mentor of mine over the weekend, and he was talking about just the whole cycle of sort of creation, maintenance, and destruction. And he said the time of destruction actually is what creates the space for the new
Yes.
creation. And he said he was like saying his take on what's happening right now is we're in a time of destruction.
Right.
Like we can freak out about it, we can judge it, we can panic, we can do all kinds of things, or we can just embrace that there's some level of, the easier, happier word is disruption, but
Right.
really like certain things are getting destroyed. And, that is a kind of a cycle of life if we really think about it. And so
Yeah.
a lot of our mindset has a lot to do with how effective or ineffective we're going to be when we find ourselves in those situations.
Yeah, I also think that, things happen with purpose. I was listening to I think it was something that Tony Robbins was talking about, but he was talking about the fact that the greatest generation, the one that we admire the most, the one who saved us in World War II, gave their lives, gave everything, just unbelievable feats of courage. They were the kids of the 20s, and you wanna talk about a group of kids that were drinking and partying, and, the Roaring '20s were a time of, sloth and, that and because the world shifted, they grew to become,
Right.
the greatest generation. So it is and I do think there is a cycle. I mean, when you get in good times, naturally you get soft,
Yep.
and then destruction shows up, so you get hard and you get tough and you
Right.
navigate your way through it, and then you're always gonna get soft again when the times get good.
Well, and I love that you bring that up because think about that historically. It's like you go through that generation went through the 20s and they're
Yeah.
partying and all the things happening from what we've read in history. And then the depression lasts for a good decade
10 years.
before the war starts. And then the war lasts, right? By the time we get into the war, it's 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's a 15-year cycle from the crash in 29 to when they're 16 years, I guess, when the war ends in
Yeah.
45. And you can imagine if living during that time, depending on your age, you could have definitely had a story of like, this is not fair.
Right.
This is really not fair. Like it was going great and then it crashed. And then we went through 10 years of terrible economic times and then 5 years of a world war that we, as a country tried to stay out of. And then we got into, and then finally at the end of that. And so again, you know, us going through what we've gone through the last 5 years is significant for almost all of us. What's
Right.
about to come, we don't know, probably pretty significant, but we without oversimplifying it or minimizing it or not being aware of some of us are in better situations than others, like, we do have more choice than I think we often think on how we're gonna show up and face it,
Yeah, and to understand, I think you say it so well, that life has these cycles, and that even a time of destruction that isn't what any of us want, there is a purpose to it. We talked about history, we've talked about sports, but nature is also great. There's
right?
nothing like a fire to create an incredible rebirth and incredible growth that would never happen if the
Right.
fire did not occur.
Right. I mean, I live out here in California, we're
Yep.
up in the Bay Area, so we thankfully, I mean, our brothers and sisters down in Southern California have just dealt with it. We had some pretty significant fires here, back to back years. I know you live in a place
Yes.
you all had terrible storms and floods, and I mean, again, none of these things would we call positive things, but oftentimes in natural disasters, we see 2 things. Number 1, we see people really coming together,
Yes,
right?
unbelievable.
And it doesn't matter who you voted for, religion you are. It's like, hey, humans helping humans, like that's who we are at our core. But we also see that there's some beautiful rebirth that can come on the other side of a disaster. Again, not to minimize the pain or the destruction or the loss that happens, but what comes after is often remarkable and even better than what was before because it forces us to have to recreate something new.
And sometimes the only way that you would ever create something new,
Yeah.
you wouldn't do it without being forced.
Absolutely. I mean, I think again of my own story, it's like there's so many things about my life today in my 50s that were informed by what happened to me in my 20s when my dream came crashing down abruptly, not in a way that I wanted. And it was heartbreaking and it was super painful physically, mentally, emotionally. And I had to get through that grief and all of it. But I look back on it now and it's like, oh my goodness, the life that I have, my wife, our family, our daughters, like the work that I do. I mean, all of it, I realize, look, if I had gotten to the big leagues, that would have been exciting and
Never
fun
would
and opened up, but it would have been a very different life than the life that I have now.
Yeah. Mike, it's hard to believe, but we are at the end of this podcast, and I always like to end it with 2 questions. And clearly, we have a lot more to talk about. Then you can answer them anyway. How do people find out about you? How do they find out about your books? How do they follow the work that you do? And the second is for people out there struggling with uncertainty right now, and there are a lot of people struggling with uncertainty. What is your greatest piece of advice to help them turn all of this uncertainty into their greatest competitive advantage?
Well, first, in terms of finding me, I mean, I'm on all the social channels, but the best place to find me and learn more about my work is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. So that's just MIKE hyphen ROBBINS.com. And then for people, I mean, for all of us, I think dealing with uncertainty, I think what's really important right now, Meredith, is for us to be kind to ourselves. Like, genuinely have some compassion. Like, if you're feeling scared, if you're feeling stressed, welcome to being human right now. It is a very challenging time, and it's okay to feel however you feel. And to what we've been talking about, if you can, in some way, shape, or form, authentically look at this time as an opportunity. How can I learn? How can this make me better? How can this make me stronger? What opportunities exist for me in this? Even if it's simply just learning how to deal with uncertainty more effectively, there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to grow in this time, even if it's uncomfortable and quite frankly, even if it's scary.
Yeah, well said. You gotta trust the journey, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mike. I definitely want to have you back on. I have so much more to talk with you about, and looking forward to seeing you at Thrive. Thank you, audience, for joining us again. And you remember, together, we are going to work hard, dig up our sleeves, roll up our sleeves, dig in, and turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. We'll see you next week.